I think we can start now. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the sixth lecture in our BRED IGC virtual PhD course on social protection. So, today's session will be focused on identifying program beneficiaries and reaching the right people. We're very pleased to welcome Abhijit Banerjee and Vivi Alatus to our session today. We're very grateful for their time and look forward to hearing what they have to share with us today. So just quickly before we begin, I'm going to pass over to Anna to go over some of the housekeeping things.
Thank you very much. So, hi guys, welcome. So, as usual, we're going to have about 1 hour, 10 minutes for the presentation, and then we're going to have 20 to 30 minutes at the end for a Q&A. In a minute, I'm going to ask people to raise their hands, and we will select 20 or so people to be live participants. This means that you will be able to unmute yourself and ask questions at the end of the presentation when we move into the question and answer section. For this lecture in particular, we're going to have more of an emphasis on the live questions that are coming through. So if you do have questions and you're not in today's lecture, you're not one of the live participants, you are still able to put that into the Q&A function as usual. But just because we receive so many of these questions, it might be difficult to get through to yours. So please don't feel disheartened. Do keep asking questions and we will do our best to answer them. Just a note on questions though, if you could please refrain from general highs and greetings. It's lovely to see that you guys are so engaged with the lectures, and it's really great to see that you're coming from all different parts of the world, but it just means that there's a slightly overwhelming number of questions or messages coming in. So if you could just refrain from doing so, that would be really helpful. In a second, I will also add a note in the webinar chat, which will have the link to the main BRED page on the IGC website. Here, we always upload the lecture, the recording of the lecture the day after, as well as the reading list, which is already live on the page, as well as the slides. So all of that information is already there for you to access. So, okay, great. Without further ado, I will pass on over. Thank you.
Do you want me to start? Hello.
Yeah, that will be great. Thank you.
That was what I was wondering. Wonderful that you're all here. I'm very excited to be participating in this lecture series, which is, I think, a remarkably important experiment that hopefully will continue, and hopefully you are as excited about it as we are. So today the plan is I'm going first. I'm going to talk about concepts mostly, and then there's a whole set of more practical issues which we will go through. There's just an enormous body of work now. Interestingly, this is relatively new. I would say 10 years ago or 15 years ago, there was very little, and now there's an enormous body of work on many of the issues that both conceptual and practical that come up in the whole issue of who should get social benefits, and we will certainly not be able to cover a very large part of that. But so therefore, I personally, and we also to maybe a lesser extent, decided to be kind of narrow. I have gone very narrow. We will cover a bit more space. I thought it is just useful, especially since you're PhD students, to think about what it means to be targeting. What are we trying to achieve? Where does that impetus come from? And it's not always the case that this is often taken as somehow as given, but I actually think that, and I'll try to make the case that the different ways in which we target are very closely related to the concepts we have of targeting. What are we trying to target is very closely related to how are we target. And I'm going to try to make that point. So that's the main point I'm going to make. And for that, I'm going to sort of develop a little bit of notation, very little, no math really, but just some notation. So I hope you don't find that overwhelming. And then with that notation, it'll be easier to speak about the conceptual issues that come up and why different targeting methods are really trying to, not only are they're not really trying to do the same thing. It's only under very specific assumptions, and I'll mention those several times, that they all do the same thing. And mostly they do very different things for the very good reason that, in fact, they are chasing after different things. So they're not trying to do the same thing. So the fact that they have different outcomes should be interpreted in the light of that. Then, just before I jump in, VB will talk about some of the very big issues of this area, starting with the concept, big current debate on whether there should be universal programs, should we give up on targeting? Targeting doesn't, as you'll see, it doesn't work extremely well. But of course, that doesn't mean necessarily that you should give up on it. And I think one of the things that you will encounter is that set of arguments, and then with that in mind, that it's not going to work very well, but I think perhaps we still need to target. She will talk about the evidence from various attempts to target. The methods I would have already mentioned, but the practicality of those is going to become also much more real as she describes the experiments. So that, take that as the kind of the big picture we're trying to get to. So with that, let me say that what targeting is. What is targeting? Targeting is you are, for social programs, it's very clearly kind of connected to the broad social kind of compact, where there's an accepted, and I think justly accepted, responsibility to help the needy. The question is, who are the needy? And that's first question. It's sort of in a sense pre-targeting. It's where all of everything starts, and it's not obvious because and this is part of what I'm going to spend time talking, it requires a socially accepted definition of need. It needs us to know what is it, what basis do we call someone needy? And then as I already warned you, the rest of the whole lecture, which Vivi will do, is and Vivi and I have very similar views. We've worked together extensively on this. So this is I'm delighted to be sharing this with her. I think the important that once we have a definition of need, then there's the question of, well, once we've defined need in a particular way, given that, what is the best way to find them and help them? And this needs to be credible, because political systems are often held to a very high standard on these things. Why are you, it's one of the political issues of our times is this idea that there are lots of undeserving people who are getting social transfers, and it's useful to both to be able to explain, and we don't do a good enough job of that sometimes, that why it's so hard to do it. That's something that's part of what is difficult about targeting. I think that would be part of the message from both my part and Vivi's part, but also then conditional on the fact that it's difficult to target. We still need to be able to convince people that what we are doing is not systematically biased. It's not hurting, leaving out some specific groups of people and including some other groups of people. What if we fail? It's not because we haven't tried hard enough. So partly what we're going to try to talk about is what does it mean to have tried hard enough. That said, let me start jumping. So that's background. We're going to start with the idea of a social utility for a family I. Family I consumes some amounts of N goods, including 0, and it has the standard concavity properties. So it's not, there's nothing funky about it other than the fact that it is specifically social utility. It's not the utility of the family. The family's affect is not what this is. It could be, but it isn't necessarily how the family is feeling about getting that bundle of consumption. It is what society considers what the number the society assigns to a family that's getting that consumption bundle. And that's important, that distinction, because families or individuals might have very different views on what they think they should be consuming. Some of those might be against the social values. There might be gambling, and society might have the view that gambling is bad. So there might be whatever buying lots of. In the US, there is this whole debate about whether schools should sell sugary sodas, and they might be buying sugary sodas, and so the social view might be that that's not acceptable. So what the social bundle of consumption, the social valuation of a bundle of consumption takes that into account. It's saying that society has a perspective on this, and we're trying to address, who is it? We're trying to find who is it that, given this valuation of the consumption bundles, is needy. Now, when I write V is a function of this vector, I'm immediately assuming something very important. I didn't say VI. I said society values everybody's consumption the same way, and that's the assumption of anonymity. Now, anonymity doesn't have to be entirely unconditional. So it could be that this program is for women with young children, or this program is for historically discriminated minorities. So it could very well be that we assume conditional anonymity of some kind. We don't. Everybody's treated the same, but conditional on being a woman with young children. There's a population of needy, and there is a budget of transfers that can be given to some of those potentially needy. We don't know who they are. Some of them are needy, some of them are not. This is an assumption again. We could think of much finer grained programs, and they exist, where you give people different amounts. They are not. Some people get whatever, more money than others, for example, because they have their needs are higher. The fact that, as I said, we could still think of this as being based on family characteristics means it could be that women with 4 children get different amounts of money than women with 2 children, but that would be fine with this framework, since we're focusing on one group within which there's anonymity. But it is not. Of course, we still need to be able to once we condition on all those observables, we may still want to give different amounts because some are poorer than others. That's a direction I won't take, but it's not an unimportant one. It's one I won't take because a lot of social programs kind of conditional on the group identity have a fixed amount of transfer, and it just makes the exposition simpler. Okay, household the transfer size 1, meaning the consumption goes up by 1 when you give it to people. Household choose a vector. So the point is that when I can only give, society sometimes tries, and I won't discuss this, but this is not unimportant, sometimes tries to give people consumption. And I think that, so meaning, for example, the food subsidies programs in Indonesia, and food subsidy programs are potentially, there could be a flypaper effect or some reason why food subsidy programs might behave different from getting the same value of money. Typically, they're inframarginal. They are not. When you get food subsidies, it doesn't cover your whole budget of food, and because they're inframarginal, at the margin you are buying food at the market price. So you, under basic economic logic, you will continue to treat the transfer as a transfer of money rather than a transfer of money rather than a transfer of goods. So that in that sense, the reason why we don't deal with this issue is because most transfer programs are inframarginal. They don't give you more. I mean, there's some housing transfer programs which are not, but most programs are. And to the extent that inframarginal, society really doesn't then change your consumption bundle per se. It just gives you money, even if they're nominally giving you food. Given that, so I said many things.
Just a quick clarification question.
I think you keep your question till the end.
Okay.
I won't have time to answer questions if and then takes other people's time. There is sorry. The households have a budget constraint, but the point I was making before is that if you give them food, they can still turn it into money, because in some sense, if you give them food, they can cut back on the amount of food they buy on the market, and therefore they can still have the same amount of food. So they're choosing. So what the government can do typically is influence their total budget, not their consumption of individual goods, unless it changes the prices. That's a whole separate issue. That, of course, affects the poor and the non-poor. I'm not going to get into that. So they're maximizing utility subject to the budget constraint that the household doesn't spend more than its total spending. Again, typically we focus on consumption rather than income. The savings choice is somehow not taken into account. It probably should be, but we don't really think about it when we measure target. We typically try to target consumption rather than saving. Okay, I better hurry up a little bit. So once you take this. So the point is that society is trying to influence the V, but it can only work through the U. So households choose this vector to maximize their utility. Notice that has an I subscript. Households have different preferences potentially, and this gives them. This maximization generates a function Cij, which is the amount of good J that household I consumes given their income is total consumption is Ci. When you substitute this into the utility function, you get a private indirect utility function, UI of CI. That's the utility the family gets when their total income is CI. That's not what society necessarily cares about. That's the point I was making about spending the money on all kinds of things that are not approved of, on sugary drinks. Therefore, what the social planner has to do is to take this function as given. The social planner says, look, I give this person CI, person can only then will choose what they're going to consume. So all I can do is influence their total consumption, and then what they do with it is their choice. And notice that even though V was anonymous, VI is not. VI is the social indirect utility function, or the welfare function, and this welfare function has an I on it because different families spend money in different ways. Given the social welfare function, the maximization problem is straightforward. Society maximizes total utility, which is given by VI of CI plus delta I times 1. Delta I is an indicator which says that you are getting the benefit, then you get 1. If you don't get it, you get 0. And there are only M prime people who can get it. This maximization problem, as you know, will immediately tell us that we should give it to the people who have the highest marginal social utility, marginal welfare. But that's not always, this is the framework that is used often, in public finance. But of course, you could imagine a very different framework. You would say societies should be judged by how well the worst of people are doing, in which case it should focus not on the people who have the highest marginal utility, but whose utility is lowest. And so social utility is lowest. You want to maximize that. So you could also give benefits to the poorest rather than the people with the highest marginal social utility. Why am I making that distinction? Because typically, this is key, typically we assume that VI doesn't have the VI of CI, doesn't have that I subscript. And because it doesn't have the I subscript, and VI is assumed under the standard assumptions, it's concave, that means that maximizing the sum of VIs, giving it to the highest marginal utility people, the highest marginal utility people, if everybody has the same preferences, everybody has the same social preferences, then the highest marginal utility person is the person with the lowest absolute utility, the poorest person. And that's why you can sort of say that, well, these two problems are the same. But typically, they're not the same. When are they the same? When everybody has the same preferences. When everybody has the same preferences, then the induced indirect social utility function is also the same because they all choose the same consumption bundle. And because of that, you can just target the poorest. So it doesn't make any difference. Typically, that's not true. And this is the first point I want to make, is that typically it is not the case that you should target people based on total consumption. The composition of consumption matters. We don't want to give it to the people who have maybe quote unquote socially bad preferences. You may not personally think that, but society has views on this. And these two social objectives, the Rawlsian and the utilitarian, will lead to different outcomes because the marginal social utility, if the poorest people, for example, are the people who, if society says, I want people to work hard, and the poor turn out to be people who for whatever, let's say, psychological reasons, their mental health issues, they will react to the money by stopping working, then society will not want to give it to them because society wants a high marginal utility, and maybe those people will not have a high marginal utility. So this is a central question in a sense. A special case of where maybe we can separate them is when the utility function is separable. There's a bad society only cares about goods 1 to n minus 1. People also want to spend on n. Then if you knew how much they are spending on n, you can just subtract that off and say that, look, yes, we typically don't count the, if you're poor because you're spending a lot of money on alcohol, we're not going to call you poor because you have a lot of money. Whether you agree with that vision or not, that's often how societies function. What that's saying is that there is a, under that assumption of separability, you can get this indirect social utility function to be nice and well behaved. It will be V of Ci minus Cin. And so you can just subtract off this good. If you knew what is the one good that you don't, everybody agrees, you don't approve of, then you can indeed do that. But you need the assumption of separability. Without separability, so that the utility function has the form, the usual form without a separable additive term, then it's not going to be the case that you can kind of subtract off that amount. You can't say that you still need to be able to kind of control for its effects, and you need some functional form assumption. So it becomes, and in fact, as you can see, there are two conflicting effects. I can give, people who are spending a lot on a bad are poorer, but and that's a reason to give them the benefit. On the other hand, they are, because their margin usually is higher, on the other hand, they are also doing something bad, and society is basically takes the view that anybody who does something bad is bad, and therefore maybe they won't get it. So there is a direct effect which then comes in. So that what this is saying is that when we with the typical mode of targeting, which is either I give it to the poorest, doesn't necessarily get us to the high marginal utility. On the other hand, if we use the community, we ask, let's say, ask around, and we ask who are the poorest, then we might get a judgment which is much more based on V, but VI really. So I'm going to be, I don't approve of the consumption of certain people. I'll come back to this point in a minute. We could then there is the other ways you could target. You could have people self-reporting. People could be asked, are you poor or not? Or there are variants of that. You could do it a little bit more suspicious, less manipulable ways. But if you did that, then again, you have the big issue that some people might feel that they need more, and others might be shy to ask, and you might punish the people who are shy to ask. So unless UI and UI is the same for everybody, and V is a linear transform of U, you are unlikely to get what the social planner wants. You'll get something else if you use people's preferences, unless unless the social planner really wants to give people who want it. Now, going back to something I already said, the community, another way targeting is done is by asking the community. When the community is asked, the community is typically, you might think that they're targeting on marginal V, for example. We can ask community who will benefit most from getting benefits. We can ask who are the poorest. And the first is closer to targeting on marginal social utility. The second is closer to targeting on the level of utility. But in either case, we don't actually know what's inside the the community's head. The community could be using some other function than the V function we want them to use, because their preferences are, like I was describing before, they don't like the people who are consuming X or Y or Z, or they don't like somebody with a particular characteristic, and we may not, unfortunately, we may not know what those are. And we can try to correct for it, but typically there's no reason why we would know it. So we might actually see that from our point of view, we see that people actually, society, because we don't actually observe the utility function, society might say that, look, the community might say, I want to give it to X because X is, while they're not the poorest, they are the people who have the right preferences. They're going to spend it on good things. So we can try to check for it. We can, and we will talk about this. We can look for, is this going specifically to relatives of the elites? Are they going to hardworking people? What is the community's preference, which may not be the greater society's preference? We can try to figure out, but we need hypothesis for it. We need to be, and even then at the specific village level, it seems impossible to correct for it. So we're always a little bit in a bind on this. Another model that's often used for targeting, and I'm in the last 2 minutes that I gave myself, is to use self-targeting. Self-targeting means I get you to do something to get the benefit. But notice that that's targeting strictly on your marginal utility. If you get it, you are happier, that's why you do it. So it's not at all about V, it's about you. And that means that we would typically, just very different from targeting marginal social utility or marginal or the level of social utility. You're just targeting something else, which is private preferences. Some people are, we just want money, but maybe they want money. They just want money. It's not a need, it's a want. And you end up targeting more on want than on need. So to summarize, each approach to targeting is actually addressing a different notion of need. And it's not necessarily what the social planner wants to fix, unless we have good reason to believe that everybody has the same preferences and the social planner takes that as their benchmark. UI is the same and it's all the same as you. Or that the community, we can use community if we believe that this community and the social planner have the same preferences. Unfortunately, many different communities have different preferences. So that seems even within the community, different people have different preferences. It's hard to imagine that. In the data, which we won't get to, but eventually maybe next year, somebody will tell you or I'll tell you about it. When we look at the community's ranking of people based on marginal social utility and total social and the level of social utility, we find widely different rankings, suggesting that the society is not choosing the poorest. The community is not choosing the poorest people, suggesting that there are elements in these things which are specific to society. They're not universal accepted preferences. Each community has its own view of who is deserving and not. All that's should make us understand that any of these methods we use, that's the world where UI is not equal to VI and VI is not equal to V, and we are in that probably in that world where any method we use will end up giving a different outcome because that's what that method is targeted to. I'm going to stop here, and VB will continue, but I'm around. I'll be back. And Frank, you are the first person. You should first person to ask a question when we come back for quick Q&A. Sorry about.
Thank you, Abhijit. Let me share my screen now. Okay. Current slide. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Yeah. So I will cover the rest of the presentation, and the fundamental question is, should we even target at all? Or should benefits be universal? This is a hot debate among economists and policymakers. Yeah. Let me walk you through the key argument on each side. For targeting, the efficiency argument is compelling. You concentrate limited resources on those who need the most. The poverty impact can be larger because you can provide bigger per beneficiary benefits, achieving greater poverty reduction with the same budget. But universalists make strong counter-argument. Universal programs eliminate exclusion errors. You can't accidentally leave out vulnerable household if everyone gets benefit. The second argument is social cohesion. Targeting can create stigma and social division. We also do not have to worry about complexity of implementation, no need for elaborate screening mechanism in finding who are the poor where do they live. Now, here is the context that makes this debate particularly intense in low and middle income countries. Lower tax collection rates and competing needs in health, infrastructure, education severely constrain budget. So there is no universal answer. The right approach depends on your country's fiscal space and also administrative capacity and political context. Before we can discuss how to target, we need to be clear about who we are trying to reach. Different programs can have different goals, which means different target population. The target can be the very poor, those living below extreme poverty line. But the goal can it be instead about focus more on breaking intergenerational poverty cycles by providing, for example, productive assets. The goal could also be helping people unable to work, individuals with disabilities, mental health condition, or elderly people. Or some programs may focus on specific outcomes like nutrition or child development, which may require different targeting criteria than income-based approach. So the key insight, the targeting approach should align with the objective and the specific poverty context you are addressing. The problem, let me emphasize why the targeting problem is particularly severe in developing countries, in low and middle income countries. First, pervasive self-employment and informal employment means most people's incomes isn't third-party reported. So we cannot really use the tools available in high-income countries. Tools from the US simply won't work here. No income-based means testing. Second, high income volatility makes point-in-time assessment, a snapshot, less reliable. A family might have decent income this month, but face crisis next month. Third, limited administrative data system for verification means you cannot easily cross-check people's claim. Hannah and Alken's 2018 research at the same time also found that universal programs are substantially more costly relative to target program in this context. So this challenge and the fact that universal program is much more costly creates intense pressure to target effectively, but with fewer tools to do so. And we will discuss about what are the possible tools. Let's explore the toolkit. We'll examine 6 main approaches, each with its own logic, strengths, and weaknesses. Again, there is no perfect method, but understanding the option helps us choose the right approach for specific context and objective. Let's start with the most direct approach, mean testing. This is like usually used in high-income country. This involves directly verifying household income or wealth to determine eligibility. The advantages, of course, when reliable income data is available, you get strong targeting accuracy. You do not have to rely on proxy. The eligibility criteria are clear and transparent. If your income is below X, you qualify. Simple. But there are disadvantages. It depends entirely on reliable information about income, which is often unavailable, especially in developing countries. So it can also create work disincentive. For example, if earning more leads to a benefit loss, why work harder? It is also difficult to verify in context with high informality, and it may miss household with volatile incomes. A family might have decent income this month, but be in crisis next month. For income-based targeting to work, you need 3 interconnected systems. First, establish unique identifier. You need a system that uniquely and comprehensively identifies each person or household in the population. The LMIC challenge, many countries lack comprehensive identification system. This is why countries like India have invested billions in biometric identification system like Aadhaar. Biometric use unique physical characteristics to establish identity. This solves both authentication problem, proving you are who you say you are. I am indeed Fifi, for example, and deduplication, ensuring you are only registered once. Second, we need to link the identifier with the income information, match this reliable income with each identifier to assess eligibility. The challenge here, LMIC, 70-90% of households operate outside formal tax system. So there simply isn't reliable third-party income data. Third, create distribution system. Develop mechanisms to authenticate recipient and deliver benefits securely. There is another challenge here. Limited financial infrastructure, especially in rural areas, and challenges in preventing fraud. Let's shift to our second major targeting approach, geographic targeting. Geographic targeting allocates resources based on the spatial concentration of poverty, the pockets of poverty. You identify poor areas and direct benefits to all residents there. How does it work? We need spatial poverty mapping. It could be using census data in combination with household survey and increasingly satellite imagery to identify geographic areas with high poverty concentration. It requires significantly less capacity than household level targeting. There is also community cohesion benefit. You avoid creating division within community. But there is a key limitation. Geographic targeting inevitably includes some non-poor households in targeted areas while excluding poor households in non-targeted areas. So when should we use geographic targeting? Most when poverty is highly spatially concentrated, and when used as a first stage filter before applying other methods. For example, you might use geography to identify poor district, then use another method to identify poor household. Geographic targeting involves important trade-offs that policymakers must consider. First, accuracy versus administrative simplicity. Geographic targeting is simple administratively than household level targeting, but it introduces both inclusion error, benefits to non-poor in targeted area, and exclusion errors, no benefit to poor in non-targeted areas. Second, there is a trade-off of geographic unit selection. Smaller units like villages improve targeting accuracy compared to larger units like district or region, but they also increase administrative costs and complexity. So geographic targeting may face political resistance also if it concentrates resources in specific region. Geographic targeting also relies on periodic census or survey data that may become outdated, and it could also create incentive for migration to targeted areas. Let me now talk about the most widely used methods in LMIC, the proxy mean test or the so-called PMT. PMT is basically just a statistical method that uses observable household characteristics to predict welfare level and identify eligible beneficiary. The type of observable characteristics can be the housing characteristic, construction material, floor type, or utility, electricity asset, and demographic characteristics, or employment characteristic. Let me just walk you briefly the implementation steps of PMT. First, data collection. Gather information on household characteristic asset, household quality, and demographic. Model development, this could be the first step instead of like the second step. Use regression analysis or other statistical methods to identify variables that predict consumption or income. Then use score calculation by applying coefficients of this model to the household characteristics that you collect with the data. And also you need to establish threshold setting, establish cutoff point for program eligibility. Of course, this is based on the budget constraint. In some cases, you might also want to have verification, validate result, either through community input or some other mechanisms. Just like the other methods, there is advantages and disadvantages or challenges. Starting with the key advantages, observable verification. You easily observe household characteristics, reducing the need for complex income documentation. And also, even though income records are unavailable, we can still do PMT when we have high informal sector, because PMT can effectively identify poor household in informal economies. Reduce manipulation. It is more difficult to manipulate than self-reported income. You can lie about your income easily, but you cannot quickly change your roof material or hide your refrigerator. And the PMT tends to capture the more permanent component of household income. Know the challenge. Prediction errors. Statistical models inevitably produce both inclusion and exclusion errors. The correlation between observable characteristics and consumption is imperfect. It is also static in nature. PMT formulas capture household condition at a specific point in time and may not reflect sudden shock. If a family falls into poverty due to illness or job loss after the survey, the PMT won't capture this. And data collection typically occurs only every few years, so the information becomes outdated. Third, transparency issues. Complex scoring formulas can be difficult for beneficiaries to understand, potentially reducing program legitimacy. If people do not understand why their neighbor qualified, but they didn't, they may perceive the process as unfair or corrupted. Let me show you just how imperfect PMTs actually are with real data from Hannah and Alken's 2018 study. This graph plot actual log per capita consumption on the vertical axis against predicted log per capita consumption on the horizontal axis. The vertical lines represent the eligibility cutoff. Look at the areas that label. Correct inclusion, the lower left quadrant, these households are poor and correctly identified as poor. Correct exclusion, the upper right, these households are not poor and correctly identified as not poor. But now look at the errors. Inclusion error, upper left quadrant. These households are not poor, but the PMT identifies them as poor. And critically exclusion error, lower right quadrant. These households are poor, but the PMT fails to identify them as poor. The scatter shows that while PMT is better than random, it is far from perfect. There is substantial noise in the relationship. This is why researchers and policymakers are constantly trying to improve PMT formulas and combine them with other methods. I will skip this slide because I've already talked a little bit about some of the part in here. Let me move to a very different approach, categorical targeting. These methods provide benefit based on easily observed characteristics correlated with poverty or vulnerability. What are the common targeting categories? Demographic groups, targeting based on age, children, elderly, gender, female-headed household. These characteristics are easy to verify and correlated with vulnerability. Second, the category that can be used is life cycle vulnerabilities targeted based on specific life stages. For example, pregnancy, school-age children, or retirement. Or it could be based on occupational status, targeting based on employment in specific sectors like agriculture or informal sectors or unemployment status. Another category is shocks exposures, targeting based on exposure on specific shocks like natural disasters, conflict, or displacement. Again, there's advantages and disadvantages. It is simple to implement with low administrative costs. You don't need complex survey or formula. The eligibility criteria are transparent. It often enjoys strong political support and sustainability because the category makes intuitive sense to voter. Sorry. But the limitations are also significant. You still have high inclusion error. You are giving benefits to non-poor within categories. Not all elderly are poor. Not all children are in poor families. Potential exclusion of poor who don't fit selected categories. What about poor working age adults without disabilities? And it may require higher budgets to achieve poverty reduction goals because you are covering many non-poor to reach the poor. Now we come to self-targeting approach. This design program with features that encourage participation by the poor while discouraging the non-poor. The idea is you let people self-select into program based on their own assessment of costs and benefits. What are the key self-targeting mechanisms? First, work requirement, program requiring manual labor at minimum wage or below minimum wage, attract those with limited alternative income opportunities. Time costs could also be another one. Requiring beneficiaries to wait in long line imposes higher opportunity costs on those with higher incomes. Quality differentiation, providing lower quality goods arise that are less attractive to higher income groups. Location-based access, placing service delivery points in areas predominantly inhabited by the poor, increase access costs for the non-poor. Now, the advantage is it eliminates the need for complex administrative screening process, saving time and money. It automatically adjusts to changing economic condition. But the limitation matter. It may exclude some poor individual due to information barriers. They don't know about the program. It may create inefficiency through work requirement if the work isn't actually productive. You are wasting resources and people's time. And crucially, time costs can represent significant opportunity costs for poor households too. So the key design challenge here, making the ordeal costly enough to screen out the non-poor, but not so costly that it excludes the poor or wastes their resources. Now we come to the community-based targeting. Community-based targeting empowers local members or leaders to identify the most vulnerable. Let me walk through briefly the implementation process. Usually, the first step is community mobilization. Engage with community members to explain program objective and selection process. Selection community formation, establish representative committees, including diverse community members. Then discussions about what is locally relevant poverty indicators and vulnerability criteria. After that, committees identify potential beneficiaries based on agreed criteria. And then there could be public validation. What are the key strengths? Local knowledge utilization. Community may have detailed knowledge about household conditions that outsiders lack. They may know who lost their job, whose child is sick, who is struggling despite appearances. Second, contextual adaptation. This adapts to local definition of poverty that varies across region. Third, community ownership. When communities select beneficiaries themselves, they are more likely to support the program. But the key limitation is also real. Elite capture, risk, local power structures may influence selection process, leading to favoritism. Social tension, the process may create community conflicts. Selecting some neighbors over others is inherently difficult. And community may use different criteria than what the program intends. So we already talked about some of the challenges. What are the mitigation strategy to address some of the challenges, such as elite captures or community representation, where you have selection committee may not adequately represent marginalized group or inconsistent criteria. Different communities may apply varying standard of poverty. So the first mitigation is transparent process. Conduct selection in public meetings with clear documentation of decision and criteria. Diverse community composition to ensure committee include representative from different social groups, including women and marginalized population. Standardized guideline provide clear standardized poverty criteria while allowing for contextual adaptation. And consider hybrid approach, combine community targeting with other methods, PMT, categorical, to create checks and balances. For example, community identify candidate, but PMT provides a verification checks. Now we transition from theory and methods to evidence. What actually works? How do we know? The evidence that I'm going to share comes primarily from Indonesia, a middle-income country with high informality. We have several targeting experiments. The first targeting experiment, let me describe. It's conducted across 140 villages in Indonesia in 3 provinces. The experiment compared 3 approaches. First, PMT treatment, standard proximin testing that I explained earlier. Second, community treatment, community meetings where residents rank household from poorest to richest. The third is the hybrid treatment. Community rank household as in the community treatment, then household with the lowest ranking up to 1.5 times the village quota are surveyed with the PMT questionnaires. Finally, household with the lowest PMT score up to the village quota receive benefits. To give you a sense, let me show you what PMT implementation actually looks like on the ground. This is photo from the Indonesia experiment. And here you see a PMT interviewer sitting with a household member, asking about their housing and other characteristics, and observe their characteristics. And think about the challenge, ensuring enumerators are consistent, preventing fraud, maintaining data quality, reaching remote household. This is why administrative capacity matters so much for PMT implementation. This image shows exactly what PMT is trying to identify, observable poverty indicator. Look at this house, unpaved floor, wooden plank walls with gaps, a deteriorating roof, no glass windows. Okay. Now let me show you what community targeting looks like in practice. These photos are from actual community meeting experiments. The facilitator standing at the front is holding the discussion on the concept of poverty. And then there are cards on the wall behind the facilitators. Each card represents a household in the village. The facilitator announces a household name, and the group discusses whether that household is more or less poor than household already ranked. What do we find? What we find here, look at the regression result. In the PMT treatment, mistargeting was 30%. But community treatment shows 3.1 percentage points higher mistargeting, and hybrid shows 2.9 percentage point higher. Both are statistically significant. So using the PPP $2 per day per capita expenditure cutoff, that's about 10% increase in mistargeting. So PMT wins on overall accuracy, lowest mistargeting rate. But now look at the graph on the right. These are the distribution of log consumption for beneficiary under each method. The PMT distribution is centered to the left of the community methods, better performing on average. But look at the left tail, the very poorest. The community methods select more of the very poor, those below PPP $1 per day. This is the key trade-off. PMT is better on average, but community is better at finding the most extreme poor. Let me show you why this matters, like satisfaction beyond just accuracy. The satisfaction matters comparing community to PMT. Fewer complaints in comment boxes, fewer complaints to sub-village heads, facilitator reported fewer problems. Now look at the regression table. When asked, is the method applied to determine targeted household appropriate. On a 1 to 4 scale, community treatment scores 0.161 points higher than PMT. On satisfaction with activities in general, community scores 24.5% higher. Regarding whether poor households should be added to the list, community response were 19 percentage point less likely. So, and a hybrid that lets communities tweak a PMT list does not generate the same ownership as full community ranking. Here is another crucial findings. Communities may have different concept of poverty than statisticians or society do. This table shows indeed that's what happened. Correlation between different targeting methods and for welfare metrics shows that for column 1, consumption ranking, this is the objective measure economists typically use. PMT has the highest correlation. But column 2 community survey ranks, we also collect asking each of the respondents to rank other respondents. Community treatment saw a massive or almost 25 percentage point increase in correlations. And also when we compare to sub-village health survey ranks, community treatment also shows around 25 percentage point increasing. So this is fascinating. What does this tell us? PMT correlates more highly with consumption, the standard economic measure, but community correlates more highly with how people themselves understand poverty in their specific context. We also test the elite capture questions. We divided the community targeting into 2 randomly villages. Half of villages had community elites only, choose beneficiary, just leaders in a private meeting. The other half invited the whole community to a meeting, broad participation. So what do we find? Remarkably, no evidence of elite capture. There were no difference in mistargeting outcomes between elite only and full community meeting. Even more striking, elite household and their relatives were actually less likely to be selected, regardless of actual consumption level. But here is the important context. Benefit levels were low. Beneficiaries receive about 30,000 rupiah, roughly $3 at that time. This is because elites may have greater incentive to capture the process if benefits are higher and more valuable. Okay. So let me talk about the second experiment. The second experiment is different with the first experiment. It's actually conducted in conjunction with Indonesia's CCT program. So the CCT programs provide more valuable benefits than the first experiment. The transfer range from 600,000 to 2.2 million per year. So roughly around 40 to 150 US dollar, real money. The programs target very poor households with pregnant women, infant, and young children and school-age children, being a CCT program. The second experiment tested 2 different methods. The first, PMT community hybrid, similar to the first experiment but refined. The village quotas are set using geographic targeting. The 2008 PMT listing of poor households sets 50% of the quota. Then the community can add the other 50% from the poorest household, not currently included. This gives community some way to provide their input. The second method, this is the one that I would like to emphasize more in this talk, is actually testing self-targeting, because anyone can apply, but they must be interviewed with a PMT questionnaire. This is the self-selection part. You have to take action to apply. Households with lowest PMT scores up to village quota are visited for verification. Look at this photo from the on-demand application treatment. This shows the socialization meeting held to explain the CCT program. The facilitators is standing and explaining what the program offers, who is eligible, how to apply, and when and where to come. The next photo here is what happened after household apply. Look at this photo showing the PMT interview stage. So each household that apply undergoes a full PMT questionnaire. Household are sitting and waiting their turn. Roughly, I think, if I remember correctly, the average waiting time is around 3 hours. Around 15% of the household need to come back the next day. Household invested time to attend the social security meeting, register and wait and complete the PMT interview. This is the cost that hopefully, ideally, screen out wealthier household whose opportunity cost of time is higher. Now for the crucial question, did self-targeting work? Did the poor apply while the non-poor stay home? Look at this graph showing probability of applying by consumption quantile within the baseline survey. The poorest quantile had about 62% probability of applying. As consumption increases, application rates falls dramatically. The mechanism is working. Wealthier households are screening themselves out. But notice something important. Even in the poorest quantile, 38% didn't apply. Why not? Reasons for not applying among the poor include lack of information about the program, about the event, time and financial cost, stigma or shame, and misunderstanding eligibility criteria. This is the fundamental problem with self-targeting. While it screens out the non-poor, it also screens out some poor. Let's look at how self-targeting affected error rates compared to the control treatment. The control treatment is the PMT that being used for the CCT in other areas. They conducted the same PMT interview as in self-targeting. So the only difference is who gets interviewed. In the control treatment, the distribution is relatively flat in the middle decile. There are beneficiaries in decile 4, 5, 6, 7. These are inclusion errors, non-poor receiving benefits. Look at the self-targeting distribution. It is much more concentrated in the lower decile, especially in deciles 1. Deciles 1 is the target of these CCT programs. The budget constraint is up until decile 1 only. And look, this is like much higher in self-targeting. More of the extreme poor are covered in decile 1. So this is exactly what we hope would happen. The program budget goes further in reaching the poorest. We have covered a lot of ground on traditional targeting methods and experimental evidence. Now, let's look forward about policy implication and future direction. Here is the crucial insight. Targeting approach should be tailored to specific country context. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Let me outline the key contextual factors to consider. Data availability. What's the quality and coverage of household information system? Administrative capacity. Does the government have the ability to implement complex targeting system? How strong are local social network and institution? In communities with strong social cohesion, community targeting works better. Is poverty geographically concentrated or dispersed? We can use geographic targeting. There are some principles that we need to look also when choosing, when developing targeting system. First, pilot testing. Experiment with multiple approaches before scaling. Transparency, clear communication about targeting criteria and process. Flexibility, adapt methods to changing conditions and lessons learned. And complementarity, combine methods to leverage strengths and offset weaknesses. Let's transition to the so what. So what do all these findings mean for policy and practice? Starting with the strategic policy recommendation, first, embrace hybrid approach. Combine multiple targeting methods, geographic plus PMT, PMT plus community validation. Develop dynamic system, implement regular recertification process, and on-demand application to capture changes in household circumstances. Invest in social registries. Enables rapid response during crisis and program adaptation. Countries with good registries responded much better to COVID-19. Strengthen grievance mechanism. Establish accessible responsive appeal system to correct targeting errors, because any methods will have errors. Now, for context-specific consideration, in low-income settings with limited administrative capacity and high informality, prioritize simpler approaches. categorical, geographic, or self-targeting. In middle income setting, you can use PMT, or if your data permit, income verification. In crisis-prone region, develop shock-responsive targeting system with pre-positioned registries, early warning triggers. So building the infrastructure before the crisis hits. Let me highlight some important research questions that remain open. These represent the frontiers of knowledge. First, the exclusion error problem. All targeting methods, particularly when trying to reach the extreme poor, have substantial exclusion error. How can these methods be modified to substantially eliminate these errors? Can grievance mechanism be implemented fairly to fix these challenges? This matter enormously because exclusion errors mean poor people aren't getting help. Second, transparency and right. Income-based targeting establishes clear, transparent rules and a right to program. But with complex PMT or community, it's not easy to explain. Can we simplify the eligibility to increase transparency without sacrificing productive power? This is the real tension. Static versus dynamic needs. Many methods are fundamentally static. Targeting is done infrequently based on long-running predictors. So how do we build dynamism into system while keeping administrative costs manageable? Can we use on-demand application system? Can we use more the administrative data, utilization data, spatial data, satellite data, other data, Google Street data, or AI to be able to give this dynamic needs better using the image that we can ask AI to explain to us about the household characteristics or the slum characteristics of the area. And integrated approach, how can these methods work in concert? For example, using universal transfer in high poverty density neighborhoods, but PMT in low poverty density ones. Would this reduce error? How would people view the fairness of using different methods? And they represent opportunities for you as students and future practitioners to contribute to solving these challenges. Some of the emerging directions are treatment effects and emerging responses. Some of the three outlined, I'll talk about a little bit briefly because of the time. Treatment effect targeting. Beyond identifying low income, this focus on households with high expected treatment effects. So maximizing impact of the program. The idea is to select beneficiaries who will benefit most from specific programs. But this is technically challenging, requires careful modeling and validation, but potentially can be quite transformative. Emergency system, crisis situation, natural disaster, pandemics. This approach, how can we find the approach that must balance speed, coverage, accuracy under severe time and information constraint? Anticipatory assistance moves beyond reactive approach by identifying potential beneficiary before shocks occurs. Let me end with some of the lessons learned from targeting about targeting from COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic created unprecedented challenges for social protection system worldwide. Some approach has been done. Country use different approaches. For example, some of the approaches is horizontal expansion. Countries rapidly expanded existing social registries to include newly vulnerable households. Or digital registration, mobile and online platform enable rapid self-registration and verification for emergency assistance. For example, Togo used mobile phone metadata to target, and it reduced exclusion error relative to geographic targeting. You could also use alternative data resources, satellite imagery, mobile phone data, and utility records were used to identify vulnerable households. The key lessons for targeting: invest in social registry, as previously I already mentioned, invest on dynamic targeting system, and inclusion and exclusion trade-off. During acute crisis, many countries prioritize speed and coverage over precision. They accepted higher inclusion errors. So the overarching lesson, crisis preparedness require investing in system during normal times. I will stop here and then we'll open to questions and answers. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your presentation. So we have about 15 minutes left for the Q&A. So if I say your name, please just go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Hanit, if you want to begin.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Vivian and Abhijit, for insights. My question is very specific to a context in India where there has been like an increased use of like machine. Oh, someone is blocked, I think. Should I continue or?
Yes, you can continue.
Oh. So my question is regarding like the use of machine learning algorithms for like targeting of welfare schemes, and like this has been in like practice very recently in India and like a couple of states where like they have been collecting comprehensive data from like households to build these kind of social registries, as you said.
Speak up your question. You're taking half the time. You have to get to the question faster.
My question is basically in these kind of like ML algorithms, the rate of false exclusion is very high, and that can lead to like human rights consequences because a lot of like PDS cards were like canceled and these were from like existing beneficiaries. So retrospective targeting using ML, is that a good idea, or like how can we be more careful about it?
PV, go ahead.
I think that based on the findings of like some papers already try to use ML on this, but ML really depends on the quality of the variable and the sample size. What we found from the current literature, it increased slightly the accuracy of targeting, but not by much. So there are still a lot of like the fundamental problems of the unobserved characteristics that the data does not have. It will not be able to be addressed by sophisticated, much more sophisticated than regression or logic. So there is possibility a need to use more the ML, to use AI, for example, to get better ability to have real-time image of the dwelling, image of the characteristic, and using it. So it is like part of like the future targeting research that should be encouraged. But I don't think relying on ML as a sophisticated method will give us much more better targeting approach, better targeting accuracy.
Okay, Frank, if you would like to ask your question, please.
Thanks. My question initially actually was for Abhijit on the setting, where he talked about anonymity of the households, that we assume anonymity. My question rather was, does it matter up to what extent you assume anonymity? Because I could imagine that, I mean, you could assume anonymity initially ex ante before the cash transfer, or are you essentially assuming anonymity up until the point of the cash transfer, even though ordinarily you might already have like data on the household size, the disability status and all that. And then onto like a more broad, like big picture question is, I mean, it clearly looks like there's always going to be inclusion exclusion problems, and for the social planner, if they're actually more interested in poverty reduction goals, does it make sense that they target actually the extremely poor, or should they actually more target the marginally poor? Because these are the sort of people that you're actually more likely to move, across either side of the poverty line. So does it really matter that they should target extremely
Let me go
poor
ahead
or just the
because
marginally poor?
otherwise nobody else will get to ask questions. So to answer your first question, I would say that I think to the extent that we can, they're observables, we should always use them, and everything is conditional on the observables. So whatever observables we want, if we think that those are relevant for the social decision, we should condition on them. On the second question, it seems to me that that's missing the point of the poverty line. The poverty line is exactly, we know that that's an arbitrary construct. There's no reason to ignore the poorest because they happen to be, because you want to reduce some political number called the poverty line. The poverty line has no deeper meaning than what our own constructed. This is maybe all the people we want to help, but of those, of course, the poorer are more needy. This is no reason to try to target the poverty line, though perhaps politically that's sometimes convenient.
Okay, Amelia, please.
Thank you both for your work. I just have a question about how effective the perceived targeting methodology is, or how the perception of how effective it is. Is that at all a factor of how homogeneous the community is?
Can you repeat? Sorry.
Does the community's homogeneity affect the effectiveness of targeting? I haven't seen a paper that actually does that, because of course homogeneity is not randomly assigned. It's every other thing is correlated with it. So I haven't seen a paper that has done it properly. So it's clearly having a lot of homogeneity probably makes it easier. So a priori I would say yes, but it's a hard one to have a call on, because homogeneity is completely correlated with also how people live. Do they live next to each other? Everything else. So I don't know.
Okay, thank you. For the last 8 minutes, I'm going to just say, if Evelyn, you can ask, then Shafira, and then Habtamu. I hope that I'm pronouncing those names correctly. If you could just ask your questions one after the other, please.
Thank you so much. So my first question is regarding the cold data records that were used in Togo. I wonder why they are not used more in the recent years. So my question regarding that is, can you expand a little bit on the pitfalls of this kind of targeting method? And the second question is regarding some programs expanded here in Latin America that gives cash transfer to beneficiaries that are selected into steps. First, through PMTs, and second, through categorical methods to choose children, to choose pregnant women, and etc. I wonder if we have evidence of the impact and cost effectiveness of these programs, since they are expanded, at least here in Latin America. Thank you.
I didn't catch the first question, but I will answer the second question. If your second question is about conditional cash transfer program, indeed, it's actually being used in several countries, and there are quite a numbers of literature that shows that it's improved the condition that they try to address, either like, for example, like school enrollment or health outcomes. We have from Latin America, from Mexico. We also have like some numbers also from Indonesia that shows that indeed combining the giving to the poor, but with some string attached or conditionalities, this is the focus is more trying to, the second objective is actually trying to break the intergenerational trap of poverty. And there are quite a numbers of papers that show that it actually works.
Thank you. Sorry. And my first question was regarding the metadata of cell phones used in Togo, the cold data records. I wonder why they are not being used more. What are the pitfalls, the disadvantage of that kind?
I think they are being used more. I mean, there is some attempt to validate them, and there are increasingly attempts to use them. I mean, they are extremely, you could imagine among poor people, some people are still have a child who's lives away, and so it adds a very specific form of noise. So it's not at all clear that you want to drop everything else in its favor.
If I may add, the difficulty is actually getting those data, the utilization data from the local providers. Getting those data will be very difficult. The second one for the poor, especially in some countries, and they actually change numbers very often. Their numbers now is A. Next month, they will probably choose the cheapest one. So it's difficult on that stages, on that reason.
Okay. Hi, I have a question about the Indonesian Kartu Prakerja program specifically that is self-selected and there are no time costs, monetary costs, so really anyone can apply. It's very accessible. And from the data, but correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the program tends to select people who have strong characteristics and are more likely to succeed into the program. So like maybe medium education, but like they're more likely to become employed and receive income after the program. So as like a program designer, what is the line between like choosing people who are likely to succeed and choosing people who are like have very low education, are in long unemployments and stuff and very poor? That is my question. Thank you.
Vivi, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So Kartu Prakerja actually use random selections. People can apply everywhere from the people, but then because like the number who applied much more than the allocated beneficiaries, they actually did use random. We actually have some paper on that. I think the Kartu Prakerja has some trying to get some like specific list that they got from the ministries regarding, oh, this is like more the eligible someone who already curated by the ministries, but it does not try to select those who have the possibility higher outcomes from the programs. Choosing the selections that have higher outcomes, it's more difficult. It's almost like we need to already have the model in the beginning. The proxy mean testing model shouldn't be about poverty, but more about who are the right people that will like to take the training and will get the most out of the training, etc. So it's a totally different. So the difference is just like if it is using PMT, your dependent variable, it's not about poverty, but the dependent variable is more about your eagerness to learn, your ability to take the training better in these cases. Yeah. I don't know whether I answer your question, Safira.
You did. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. My question is more of a country specific, but I like it, what is targeting, and I understand what is targeting. It means in the global case. My question is specific to my country, which is Ethiopia. We have a population of over 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. So what is the purpose of targeting for this country? Because when we target, we have to pay. There's a pain. So if I target, instead of targeting them, if I provide the benefit, maybe I will save 10% of the vulnerable population. So specific to poor countries like Ethiopia, where 40% of the population is poor, what is the relevance of targeting? In other country, in rich country, in middle income country.
Let me take that because we're out of time. So let me just
Thanks.
take. So I think that 40% means 60% are not poor, and the question is, can you rule them out by, for example, as Vivi said, you can do geographical targeting. If they all live in one area, then indeed you could do universal for those areas. I just don't know, but if the geography is such that the poor are everywhere, then 60% is still a very large fraction who won't get, who don't need the money or don't need the money as much. And presumably, you want to, given the amount of money, I mean, with 40%, you still it's even not the majority. So I would not say that there is any case for going to universal that's obvious, at least when it's 40%. When it's 80%, maybe yes, universal might be better, but 40% is still pretty low.
I will choose self-targeting, like trying to make some ordeals that you think that the non-poor will not like, so that you will still implicitly everyone can apply, but then you do some kind of like self-selection or negative list criteria. If you are having this kind of like utilization, you will not be available. Do self-targeting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we're out of time. I just want to thank Abhijit and Vivi again for your time today and for the wonderful presentation on reaching the right people. And thank you to everyone else for your participation in the questions. So next week's lecture is going to be on digital technology and social protection by Sandeep Sukthankar. So see you all next week. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice to see you, Vivi.
Thank you very much.
Nice to
Bye.
see you. Say
Thank
hi
you very
to
much.
Krishna.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.